Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this webinar by Danish Sound Cluster. We are talking about sound in restaurants today. My name is Jeppe Lindegaard. I am the event and project manager here at Danish Sound Cluster. And at Danish Sound Cluster, we are a member organization facilitating the sharing of knowledge, technology, and research to stimulate collaboration in the sound community and spread sound awareness in society. Today we have three experts in sound with you. We have Charles Spence, who is head of cross-model research lab at Oxford University. Professor Charles Spence is a world-famous experimental psychologist, and his work focuses on the design of enhanced multisensory food and drink experiences through collaborations with chefs, baristas, chocolatiers, and perfumiers, plus the food and beverage and flavor and fragrance industries. Charles has worked extensively on the question of how technology will transform our dining and drinking experiences in the future. Charles Spence has published over 1,100 academic articles and edited or authored 16 books, including the international bestseller Gastrophysics, The New Science of Eating from 2017. And also we have creative director at Efterklang, Martin Hallberg. And Martin is a sound designer and creative director helping companies to utilize sound strategically. Efterklang is one of the world's largest sound agencies with 130 engineers, designers, and technical specialists exclusively working with sound. Martin has over 20 years of experience in audio branding and sound design, leading global projects in areas like balancing noisy city sound environments, helping product development companies to make products that don't need to beep, and audio branding and sound concept developing to help brands be heard in the right way. Now, finally, we have Lars Borg Andersen, who is a sound designer and director of music and sound design at Alchemist. Lars is a composer and sound designer from Copenhagen, and he's the director of music and sound design at the Michelin restaurant Alchemist. At Alchemist, he is the creator of immersive music, soundscapes, and sound design for dining areas, lounges, a multimedia dome, and installation rooms. Lars has a BA in electronic music from the Royal Academy of Music, Aalborg, and a master degree in audio design from Aarhus University. And welcome to all three of you. Very happy to see you today. Now, just to kick things off here, I'd love to just ask all three of you, what is the best restaurant experience you've had recently? I don't know, Martin, if you want to start.
Oh, that is a really good question. It was actually a fast food experience in Malmö, a very small place where no consideration taken to sound environment at all, but it was a really good experience. So almost like a fast food truck. So that is one what I will choose. Yes.
Right. So my next question was, what was the sound environment like in that restaurant or eating experience? But you've already kind of answered that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So there was no sound.
No sound at all. It was actually outside as well. So maybe this doesn't count, but that was the one I started to think about. Yeah.
I guess you could say it's a realistic soundscape environment.
Exactly. A natural soundscape environment.
No,
Yeah.
natural. Yes, natural.
Yes.
That's the
Yeah.
right word. Yeah. Okay. What about you, Lars?
Well, my most recent dining experience was actually at restaurant Gemini, which is a side restaurant for the Planetariet at Frederiksberg. The food was super great, and we actually got it at a discount, which made the experience that much more better. The sound environment, there was no music actually, and the acoustics were not that great. It was actually kind of loud, but the service was great, the food was great, and it had a really vibrant feeling to it. So that was really enjoyable.
Okay.
Even though I was kind of
so when you look back at it, what effect do you think the sound environment had after all?
On a personal level, and I talked with this about with my friends that I was dining with, the loudness of because there was a huge amount of people inside the dining room, and I felt it became a bit of a cacophony at some point. You of course learn to kind of tune it out, but it was a bit annoying. I had a bit of a hard time hearing what my friends said, but I'm sure they didn't say anything funny, so I'm sure I didn't miss out. Does it make sense?
Yep, sure. What about you, Charles?
Well, I just come back from Milan last Friday and got to meet and eat at the Sensorium restaurant, young chef Federico Rottigni. There's 11 people at the counter with lots of lights, no projections, but amazing sound system with lots of sort of sensory tricks and blindfolding and spraying perfumes. But also, probably what I liked most was this whole mix of sounds, from musical to ambient, where everything you just thought, that's great, jumping across centuries, continents, styles of music, and so on, through to kind of playing with some. You've got such a special sound system that I got real ultra low frequency sounds that kind of vibrating your body and creating some intriguing effects together with the music playing on top.
Right. So that is does indeed sound like a multi-sensory experience, not just, sound just being one part of it.
Absolutely. And sort of a question of, how for this 2 hour experience was the sound, did you start with the dishes and then figure out what sounds go with that? Or do you have a 2 hour sound track that kind of times the dishes and then think, well, what can I cook and present that will work with that music? Or kind of a co-evolution of the two. But really nice to see somebody with put so much effort into the sound design and to really feel its impact when done well.
Right. So did you, during your eating experience, or maybe after, did you have any thoughts about the effect of the sound design?
Just how both this kind of, it was all sort of played on a pre-organized system that controls the lights and the music, and hence every dish has to come out at a particular time. So some interesting challenges there. But it's really this sort of low frequency kind of music, but it's like a continuous low frequency note, and the way it sort of made your body feel, and then how you interpreted that, how that kind of made you feel differently about that the dish was served. And supposedly this dish with a kind of nostalgic music and the sound of childhood schoolrooms gets many diners to cry. So a really kind of extraordinary experience that in no small part is attributable to the kind of the soundscapes, both audible and felt, that are kind of been designed in to match the total experience.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Just to kind of make clear here before we dive into the fun of it. There's something about function, the function of music or sound design, added sound in a restaurant. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Maybe Martin, you wanna start?
Sure. Where to start? I mean, using sound and using music is a very effective tool, of course, to set the tempo, for example, for a dining experience. And I mean, everything from all the hamburger chains using leave beats, having a high tempo to make people eat faster and then leave their tables so they can bring in more customers, to, I mean, fine dining places playing really slow tempo to make you feel at ease and stay longer and maybe spend more money. Tempo is just one thing, but I mean the that the sound affects you when you are having a dinner is totally clear, and used, I think, in a really effective way in many places.
And you, Lars, do you wanna chime
in? Can you repeat the question again, just so I?
Sure. Just a bit of kind of some thoughts on the function of music in a restaurant. Maybe at a place like Alchemist. Maybe I'm sure you'll dive more into that later, but just some general thoughts.
I mean, in general, I would say music in restaurants is in the same domain as how music has an effect in all sorts of areas. It's an essential tool for setting a mood, for setting a pace, introducing energy or introducing less energy. For instance, what Martin said about like higher pace will maybe make you a bit more not upset, but will make you maybe leave the restaurant earlier. And I mean, my approach to music is that music just has an inherent effect on people in different settings. It's a different setting from a concert to a cinema to a lounge, something like that, or an airport or a restaurant. Specifically at a restaurant, I would say the role of sound, or like the function of sound, is to make people feel what is intended for them to feel. If it's a fine dining, as Martin said, you want them maybe to relax, to feel calm, to feel at ease. You want them maybe to stay for longer, purchase those expensive whiskeys, something like that. Maybe if it's not fine dining, but something more casual, maybe something more urban, you want to introduce that kind of energetic vibe. Maybe that a lot of customer wants to go out later, have more drinks, and you kind of want to set that mood. At least that's my perception of how or what function music has in restaurants, if that makes sense.
That's super interesting, because I think what many people would probably think at first is atmosphere, but what you're saying is that it has all kinds of functions, and basically we can conclude that it depends.
I would say so. There are so many different restaurants with intended atmospheres or intended moods, and music can kind of conform to what you want it to conform to, if that makes sense. But I would say atmosphere as well. That's totally
Okay,
the
Charles,
function of music.
do you have anything to add?
Yeah, yeah. I kind of think, it's clear all the various effects that music can have in dining contexts. But, to date, we're kind of all still mostly taking music that's pre-recorded for a different purpose, for a different audience at a different time. And I think we're starting to see maybe the kind of the re-emergence of tafel music, music to be designed to be listened to while you eat from centuries ago. Maybe it's neo-tafel music, we should call it. And this sort of, how far could we go when the music was specifically designed for a dish, for a course, for a flavor, in terms of sort of harmonizing sensations and maybe having that, sort of total work of art experience through really engaging all the senses in this kind of bespoke and designed manner. It's exciting to see how some of the chefs now, are starting to work to value much more highly the sound design in the spaces and think more creatively about what sound could do and music could do, rather than just what have we got in the library and what can we put on.
Right. Okay, I think that's a perfect bridge for your presentation, Charles. So I will leave the floor to you and say thank you to Martin and Lars. I'll talk to you later.
Okay. So thank you for the introduction and the questions that warm us up. Let's put that on full screen. I just want to set the stage, really, I guess, with a bit of the research. I come not as a sound designer nor as a chef or anything of those things, but as a psychologist interested in the senses and interested in sense hacking, how we can modify the places we work and live to enhance the experiences we have. But also aware that very often, when you ask people, what is it that makes you feel that way about that dish or that drink or that dinner or that experience, the answers you get back don't necessarily reflect the key kind of sensory triggers that are actually driving the experience. And so I sort of come in to think about, how do you measure these the impact of sound in this context on people when they don't really realize what it's doing to them themselves. So that's kind of under the header of sound bites and sonic seasoning, hinting at this, what we can do in the future to optimize sound design, to modify the taste and flavor of foods in ways that hopefully people will find enjoyable. But before we get what sort of sound and music can do, I guess the sort of starting point is what it is currently doing in too many places around us, and especially in North American restaurants, but also in the UK. Here in Oxford, I can name a few of the places where it's kind of impossible to hear your dinner companions speak, to get your order across to the waiter, or really to enjoy yourself when you're bombarded with 80, 100 decibels of background noise. And this seems to be something that's sort of getting worse and worse as the years go by, or at least as we are better able to record, sort of public recording of sound levels on their mobile devices is drawing attention to this problem, such that the Wall Street Journal here suggesting maybe you need to take some earplugs along with you in order to actually enjoy your eating experience. So this, I guess, would be about sort of noise as a detrimental impact on tasting. Noise defined as unpleasant sound or music, perhaps caused by that shift towards Scandi design and Nordic hard surfaces and lack of sound absorbing materials in so many restaurants. Perhaps attributable to those sort of chefs, especially those in New York, who would play music in the kitchens at 100 decibels to motivate their staff to chop and dice and mash, and then thought, well, why not play the same music to our guests who are eating the food that we're preparing at that sound level? Perhaps not a good idea. But what exactly is it doing to us? And what can we do about it? Well, I think it's restaurants are not the only places where sound levels have been increasing in the West in recent years. I'm also very interested in noise levels in school canteens, hospitals, care facilities, where again, the figures are horrifying to hear that many hospitals and hospital canteens are over 100 decibels, even at night when people are trying to sleep with all the alerts and bells and the hard surfaces. And this is having a real demonstrable negative impact on people's health and ability to recover in the place that's supposed to be designed sensorially for healthcare. We've done work thinking about one particular kind of noise, not the noise of a restaurant, but the noise of an aeroplane. Average airplanes come in at about 80 to 85 decibels of background noise, depending where you're sitting on the plane. And what does that do to our ability to taste? The research shows, as we suggested it would, that airplane noise, and hence perhaps also loud restaurants, suppress our ability to taste, to discriminate sweet and salty, and the alcohol level in drinks. But what noise, such as airplane noise, does is actually enhance our perception of umami, the mysterious fifth taste, and hence perhaps explaining why, a quarter of the passengers who fly will order a Bloody Mary or tomato juice in the aeroplane when they'll never do it on the ground. If you like a Bloody Mary, you should like it everywhere. In fact, that's not the case. You only order it up there, and that's as a result, this, of the impact of noise on tasting, boosting umami and suppressing the other tastes, again, with negative sort of health consequences. If in an airplane meal you need to add to 20 to 30% more sugar and salt to make it taste the same way it would on the ground, in large part because of the engine noise, then of course that's going to be pretty unhealthy for anything that you eat up there. Okay. That's a negative side. But if we tone down the volume of the music, take it out of that sort of noise and disruptive, unpleasant level, and think about what it can do constructively to the consumer experience, or at least to consumer behavior, then one of my favorite studies has to be this one from North and colleagues in an English supermarket, but it's been replicated in restaurants now, where you have French and German wine on the shelf or on the menu. Some days you play French accordion music. Some days you play German beer keller music instead, and you just see what people buy. Can you use music to nudge consumer behavior? And the answer is you most definitely can. That when French music is playing, 3/4 of the bottles sold are French wine. When the umpa German beer keller music's playing, suddenly those numbers are reversed. Everyone's buying German wine instead. That's striking in itself to show the impact of sound on our food behaviors. But what's more striking to me is that when people came away from their till and were asked, why did you buy French wine today? Only about a small percentage of people said it was the music that was playing. Most people thought, well, I'm cooking beef bourguignon tonight. It had to be French wine for a French dish. So the music affects us, even though most people are unaware of its impact on their behavior and choices. You see it here in this restaurant, and I have colleagues working in the sound design, the food courts, in some of those sort of Las Vegas casinos, where you have the French, the Thai, the Italian, and for whatever reason, the big queue builds up on the Thai counter, people taking ages to be served, and they just stick on a bit of Dean Martin as they stand over on the gantry. That's amore, and suddenly the queues start building up on the Italian counter, and so they can systematically and strategically bias people's behavior through the music they play. This is kind of a sort of semantic association, I guess, of music to taste. And if I want to make you spend a bit more, then we put on the classical music. Again, in the wine shop, in the African-themed restaurant, and many other cafeterias and elsewhere, classical music seemingly priming notions of class and quality and expense and luxury, and people spending more than $1 extra per bottle on the wine, all without their awareness of why they've chose to splash the cash more. And so when I go into restaurants, chefs who really think passionately about the food, but they've just stuck their iPod on, random selection or something, or the favorite playlist, and you go, you can't be playing, I don't know, was it Frank Sinatra, Christmas-themed Jingle Bell stuff in the middle of June in an Indian restaurant. It's just all wrong. Don't you realize how important that is to the experience of your guests and the food you serve and you care so much about? Okay, enough of that. So those are all just off-the-shelf music that has impact. And if you combine the elements, if you combine the fast tempo music, as we heard in the questions, with loud music, the research suggests people will drink 30% more with loud, fast music. And that's why places like Planet Hollywood and such like Hard Rock Cafe, have it in their mission statement. We will play loud, fast music all the time because we know we'll get 30% more sales. Maybe the downside, where consumers are manipulated through sound to behave in different ways than they otherwise might. Is that loud? 100 decibels in the restaurant, making me spend more, eat faster, drink more, even though it's impairing my own experience of what I am tasting. That's not in my interest. I want to switch it now and just think about how we started to take sound and music and incorporate it into a dish. This sort of notion of sound as a forgotten flavor sense. Sound, as the former world's best chef Heston Blumenthal once said, sound as one of the ingredients that the chef has at their disposal, along with the spices and the herbs and such like. And together with a chef here in Oxford, we've done experiments to demonstrate that people will rate seafood as tasting significantly more flavorful when listening to the sounds of the sea than when listening to farmyard chickens or some other incongruent soundscape. And that notion came into this, I think, one of the first examples of sort of sonic seasoning in a restaurant, the 3 Michelin star Fat Duck, back in 2007, a dish that comes to the table looking like the seashore with sand, foam, sashimi seaweed, but also with a conch shell with earbuds so that the diner will hear the sounds of the sea, the seagulls, the waves crashing on the beach. And we've got the evidence to demonstrate that that dish will taste significantly better than with regular restaurant cutlery sounds or whatever else. Clearly, this is the once-in-a-lifetime experience, but how could this insight about sounds changing the enjoyment of food be scaled to mainstream chain restaurants and beyond? And this is kind of a semantic again in the sense of it's seaside sounds with seafood. That kind of makes sense and maybe is obvious in hindsight. There we go. But how can we use that to nudge people in maybe more sustainable ways? Well, with a London chef, Joseph Youssef, who's very interested in the sound of his space, his gastrophysics chef's table, he serves a jellyfish dish. Not because he thinks people will necessarily had it before, nor look forward to eating it, but because the seas are getting warmer, and we need to do something with all the jellyfish floating in the Mediterranean. So why not eat them? And he tries to curate a great first experience of jellyfish, which has no taste, which is not jelly-ish, but it's just crunch, it's just texture, sonic texture of food. And so the dish comes to the table with projection mapping, with headphones, and you hear this soundscape, which has got the sounds of the sea where the jellyfish were floating. Blah, 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 blah. But crucially also, periodically, the sound of crunch. I think a really nice example of sound design. And what happens in the restaurant when you have the headphones on, you stop talking for a course, and so you really focus on the food, and your brain kind of goes, was that me crunching? Was that the headphones? And sometimes they come into alignment. Sometimes the headphones crunch, but you don't. Sometimes you crunch, but the headphones do nothing. And it's that constant sort of segregation and integration that really draws diners into the dish and can hopefully be used to nudge them towards, ordering that jellyfish the next time they see it, if they enjoyed it so much through the curated, multi-sensory and sound-designed experience the first time through. But over the last few years, we've gone beyond that, beyond the sounds of stuff, the sounds of the sea with seafood, to thinking about more abstract composition of sounds and music in order to systematically, predictively change the taste of food. And this is more narrowly what we mean by sort of sonic seasoning. And we've done research in restaurants and in the lab and online to demonstrate that very low-pitched sounds or music will bring out the bitter taste, say in a cup of coffee or a dark chocolate, whereas tinkling, high-pitched sounds will accentuate sweetness by as much as 10 to 15%. That notion of sonically sweetening your food was picked up by this Beijing cafe, Jin Cafe, where they played music like this all day long, so that they could add less sugar to the cakes, pastries, and drinks, but hopefully keep your sweet perception you know and love just as high as you like it, just with a few less calories. So this is a great example of sonic seasoning. It's the best one out there so far. I'm not sure I'd want to listen to it all day if I was working in that cafe. It'd probably drive me mad. So it's very effective at sonically seasoning the food. It's just not necessarily catch your hugely emotive piece of music. And that's, I think, kind of the challenge that we face currently, to distinguish the different ways in which music can bias our taste. Not just for sweetness or for bitterness, But here in a Nashville restaurant, we worked with a chef with a spicy mango salad shown here. And we were able to predictably design soundscapes with Steve Keller from IV Audio Branding at the time, which sounds like this. And which systematically enhanced the spiciness of the dish, the flavour, and didn't change the other dimensions of taste. So we're just going in there and dialing up a specific taste, flavor, or texture through this kind of laboratory-based research that's then turned into music you might hopefully want to listen to in a restaurant while you eat. Sometimes it's just in the background, and other times maybe your attention is drawn to it. So putting all that stuff together, then what do we have? I think actually what we hear influences our food, behavior, choices, experiences, and memories in multiple ways. We're on the negative side, kind of cross-modal masking when music or noise or conversation is too loud, when surfaces are too reflective, deteriorating our experience, suppressing sweet, alcohol, and salty tastes. We've got this sort of sonic seasoning where we match, in an almost synesthetic way, but not quite synesthetic, sound qualities of timbre, pitch, tempo to taste and flavor qualities. We've also got the notion of music-induced emotion. That music, one of the great things about it, is a very effective tool to take people on an emotional journey, to make them happy or sad, energetic or relaxed. And those sort of emotionally induced effects from music will then transfer over to what we think about the food. So put simply, the more you like the music that is played or the soundscape, the more you like the food you're tasting. So this transfers. And hence, maybe what you want to do primarily is pick the most liked music. And when what you're hearing and tasting are kind of congruent in this almost synesthetic way, then you'll find the whole experience much easier to process as a diner. And hence that processing fluency, the ease of enjoying the dish will also make it taste better. I'll just leave you, since I guess some of you are in Copenhagen, aren't you, I think, with this, what's next in the world of sound design. This comes from the University of Copenhagen, from Christian Holt Hansen, 1976, is what got me inspired in sound and taste. It's the extraordinary experience. Back then, half a century ago, he brought people into the lab, gave them a bottle of Carlsberg or a tin of Carlsberg export lager, elephant lager, and a tone generator, and said, match the tone to the taste. Sounds like a stupid thing. What do you mean, match the tone to the taste? He finds that the elephant lager, which is more alcoholic, is matched to a higher frequency sound than the lower alcohol regular Carlsberg, predictably, between people. He then brings some other people back and plays them the pitch of harmony. They taste the beer and pick and listen to tones of the pitch that was decided to match. And what happens is, people have these amazing experiences. Just with a bottle of beer and a tone generator, you have people saying, wow, the tone turned into a tune, thrills of pleasure through my body. I felt as if my head was expanding, my arms shook, the tone was intensified. So it goes on. Maybe, there were a lot of drugs around in Copenhagen back in 1969. I'm not sure, but something was going on. But this is an extraordinary experience that you don't find in a bottle of beer, that you don't find in the music by itself, but only when the two things come together. And that's what we're pursuing currently. Can we deliver more of these extraordinary tasting experiences? Not just dialing up sweetness or spiciness, but delivering emergent experiences. Perhaps hinted at in this example from John Jones, the former director, James John, sorry, the former director of the Bath School of Wine, who's talking about Mozart combined with a glass of Chardonnay. And he says, just as the sonant complexity is doubled, the gustatory effects of ripe fruit on toasted vanilla explode on the palate, and the appreciation of both is taken to an entirely new level. It's an emergent multisensory experience. It's not in the wine, it's not in the music, it's in the perfect, harmonized, congruent combination of the two. And I think we're going to see more and more chefs, but also musical creatives working together, hopefully with a bit of science in the background, to direct this kind of connection between the senses and the multisensory experiences I hope we'll all be tasting and listening to in the future.
Well, thank you very much, Charles. That was very, very interesting. I have already a question coming in, but we'll take that in the latter end when Martin and Lars have done their presentation. So now I'll leave it with you, Martin, and thank you very much, Charles. Martin is the creative director of sound agency Efterklang in Stockholm, and he would love to talk a bit about, yes, please, what, Martin, would you like to tell us about?
Absolutely. Yes, I would like to speak a little bit about sound in restaurant today, and more on a practical note, how to work with different kind of sound environments and different kind of sound concept in restaurants. So, and I think, I think I actually start at the end of this with the takeaways that I want you to think about from this presentation. So I framed this presentation. And the 4 takeaways on great sound in restaurants is actually pretty simple. It's 4 different things. It's good hearing around your own table. Most of us go to restaurants to enjoy our company, to talk with our friends, and to create an environment where you actually hear the people that you're talking with around the table is the most crucial part of the sound concept for a restaurant. The next one is as little overhearing as possible from other tables. According to a lot of studies, the biggest problem of having a noisy environment is that you hear too much from other tables around you. So try to take away as much sound from those tables as possible is the second takeaway. The third takeaway is actually creating a suitable sound design concept. Charles was speaking about really interesting things and all these high-level concepts, but there's a lot of restaurants out there that don't have that budget or that experimental level on what they are creating. So creating that suitable sound design concept for that specific area or specific restaurant is the third takeaway. And last but not least, something that you all sometimes forget in this kind of situation, and that is to create a good sound environment to work in for the stuff that is working at the restaurant. So these 4 is the pillars, and they are quite easy to understand. They are much harder to create, but that is something that I will talk more about today. And I really have tried to simplify this subject because it can be really, really complicated and really, really technical. But one part that is really important is to simplify it so the customers and the restaurateurs really understand this subject. So they also understand what the possibilities of working with sound and make it super easy for everyone to understand. So that is the angle I have on this presentation today. And I have written here that the experience, and hearing Charles' concepts, that is totally clear that you're working with different kind of experiences. But a lot of restaurants are actually only talking about decibel levels. They are not talking about the sound experience in the restaurant. They're only talking about technical things. So a big part of working with these type of concepts for smaller restaurants is actually to start to talk about the experience. And when we at Efterklang talk about the experience, we do that both from a technical aspect, from an engineering perspective, but also from a design perspective. So I will bore you with some corporate slides, but that is just to put everything in context and show what we are and how we are working. I am creative director at Efterklang, as Jeppe mentioned earlier, and we are actually 150 persons working with sound today. We have around 3,000 sound projects per year going through Efterklang, and we have been around since 1956. We are situated in all of the Nordic countries and also in the Netherlands. And as I said, we are 150 persons, and I would say like 130 of them are engineers, and 20 of us are working with this design part of sound. And we strive to be at the same table in all of our projects, to work with both the engineering part and the design part in our projects to create the best overall outcome of the projects. We are also a part of a bigger family with a lot of architects agencies in a sound or in a design and engineering consultant called AFRI. So we have some sibling brands here, some architect agencies. So we're very used to working close to architects in our field when we're working, for example, for physical environments. And as I said, I mean, the engineering and design part maybe feels totally natural to you, but in a lot of projects that isn't the case. Sometimes you forget to bring in the engineering part in the projects. Maybe you only work with the design part. And sometimes you forget to bring in the design perspective, the experience of what you're creating, and only talking about the measurements and only decibel levels. So we are always aiming at both these angles on the project to create the best outcomes. And we are also working with all these different fields. And I think that is also interesting to understand that we are both working with the indoor environment, the room acoustics that we will talk about today, but we're also working with community noise, for example. And that is something that also taps into this area that I will talk a little bit more about later as well. Okay, back to the experience. And I mean, what is the experience of the restaurants? I mean, the sound experience of restaurants. And I have to say, and also reading a lot of studies and also listening to Charles now, that it's often pretty bad. Often it's up to, as Charles said, also the architecture. You want to have this hard, simple surfaces, the clean environment, and that often leaves a bad, really bad acoustic environment. So there's a lot of things to do out there. And I mean, there's a lot of studies around this. I mean, I just found something from Ecophone, and that is that 81% of French respondents have avoided to at least one type of eatery when it was too noisy. I mean, there's a lot of customers that actually leave before coming into restaurants if they feel that the vibe is too noisy in a restaurant. And there's also this misunderstanding that some people say that noisy bars sell actually more beer because you cannot hear the one you're talking to, so you have to just stand quiet and drink some beer instead. But we haven't found any figures on that, and I really would be interested to hear who has said that, because I mean, that speaks against all our ideas about how sound and music is used. I mean, pleasant music makes you stay longer and spend more money if you have a slower tempo, as we talked about earlier today. And also the hamburger chains, I mean, all these McDonald's and Burger King are using really high tempo to make you eat faster and leave. So making this more chaotic environment is actually more, I mean, it creates less sales than sell more beer, because people will actually leave earlier if the sound is too crowded as a noisy bar like that. And I mean, so it's bad sound experience is actually bad for everyone. I mean, both the visitors who is visiting the restaurant, but also the owners, of course, because you sell less in a restaurant that is bad, have a bad acoustic environment, and also actually for the whole society. I will come to that later in this presentation. And one important thing is to explain this so that everyone understands. And when we say everyone, we mean our clients, the architects, the entrepreneurs, to really make them understand the aspect of sound and what tools we have to change the sound environment, but also have them to experience what different kinds of sound environments can do for their venue. Because it's actually a very important thing. I mean, then they can make the right type of decision making, because when only looking at figures or only having someone to explain to you what type of sounds you will hear, that is a bad content to make good decisions. So creating or almost an oralization of the environment, that is something that needs to be done very in a sensitive way, because you also don't want to mislead the clients. So you really need to do it in a good way. But this is something that we look really much into at Efterklang, and we have actually started to work with the gaming engine Unreal, for example, to make the clients and customers experience the sound environment that we are actually creating for them. But one way of describing the sound environment can be like this. I mean, sound is wild. Sound is all over. Sound is behaving in a lot of different ways. And our job is to rein in the sounds. I mean, to control the different sound sources and also to divide them into different groups and take control over the whole sound environment. And that is actually something that you do a lot when you work with music. So using that, that figure, so to speak, to strive for the preciseness of a music mix is really interesting when it comes to sound. And this is something that we want our clients to think in that type of model. So think about that you had a small little mixer with you in an environment that was connected to the environment. And then I don't mean only the speaker system. I mean all the different sound sources that you have in a restaurant. It can be a kitchen, it can be people talking, it can be all these different sound sources. So on the first fader we have friends, for example. We have your table, the people that are sitting around your table. And I mean, you want to have more of those, right? You want to hear those more. So you would like to raise that fader on the mixer table. And then you have people around you, the people that are sitting next to you on other tables. That is something that you want less of. You lower that fader and set it lower on the mixer table. And then we have maybe some sounds from the kitchen. And that could actually be quite nice to have. You don't want to have them that high, but you can have a little bit of a leakage from the kitchen. You can hear the action in the kitchen. That is something that can add to the atmosphere. And then you have bathroom sounds, maybe. That is something that you want to get rid of totally. You just want to take those away because no one wants to listen to that. And then we have music or sound design, and that is something that also needs to fit in the certain kind of mix at the right level to create the balance on the mixing table. And last but not least, also when it comes to the music, you also want to, of course, use the EQ to not be, I mean, to fine-tune the music both for the environment inside the restaurant, but also for the neighbors, so make sure that the sound won't leak from the restaurant, because that is something that we'll also talk a little bit more about later. And last but not least, we have the last fader is the ventilation. And that is something that I also want to take away. To gather all sound sources on a mixer table like this, and then push the two red action buttons and get a receipt of measures. Different things that you need to do to create this remix of the sound environment. I mean, for example, for the first faders, you need to tweak the speech intelligibility. I mean, you have to make sure that you really understand the people that are sitting around your table. And that is something called speech intelligibility, the ability to understand what a person is saying. At the same time, you want to lower the speech intelligibility from the other areas, from the other tables. So that is a balance and a tweak thing to do. I mean, when it comes to the kitchen, you want to isolate against the kitchen, of course, to make the kitchen sound less. And the same thing as with the bathrooms. When it comes to the sound system, you want to tweak that sound system to make sure that all the speakers are placed at the right places, but also make sure with the EQ to create the perfect type of sounds from those type of speaker systems. And also this comes out to the layout of the whole restaurants, of course. That is a part of it as well. And also to isolate the ventilation system. And then to do the final master, because all of these things is often small actions that you can do, both when it comes to physical acoustic things, but also when it comes to the production of the music. And together, these will actually create the final master for the sound environment in the restaurants. And if you start to talk about this with customers, they are beginning to understand the field of sounds, that you want to compare all these different sound sources into one, and then to start talk about the final mix for that type of area. Okay, so our acousticians, what type of tools do they have to work with? Of course, we have the sound insulation part. I mean, to make sure that we don't leak sound outside of the restaurant, playing super high bass, for example, that will annoy the neighbors. But at the same time, we also have to make sure that the sound, the city noise won't come into the restaurant. So that is the first big thing to make sure when we are helping the architects to plan for this. The next thing, I will do this very, very briefly. It's much more complicated, but I will just do it short. The layout of the restaurants, it's very important, of course, as well, to plan for the balanced dining experience and make sure that all the walkthroughs in the restaurants or the different areas that people will go to are in the right place, so it won't create any more noise than necessary when people are walking around in the restaurant, of course. We have also the ability, of course, to reduce sound sources, get rid of all unwanted noise in a restaurant. It can be everything from loud kitchen machines, of course, sometimes kitchen machines that is out in the dining area that you want to reduce. We have all been to like a Italian coffee shop, for example, and listened to espresso machines or all these type of machines that can create a nice environment, but it can also be pretty annoying in a restaurant environment. So going through all the different sound sources and making sure that they make as less noise as possible. We are working with barriers, of course. I mean, talking about the speechability thing, that we want to divide maybe the restaurant in different areas, different sections. Maybe the customers won't like to sit in cubicles, but I mean, in certain kind of way, we can add to the overall acoustic environment by planning in a good way together with the interior architects. And the goal is to only hear your friends clear and just have the other sounds as an atmosphere in the restaurant. Of course, reverberation time is a part of it. Set the time for your concept. And here, I mean, a noisy bar can sometimes be the concept. So therefore, you can have a little bit longer reverberation time. But when it comes to fine dining, you pretty much expect to have the short reverberation time, the really close sound environment with a lot of soft materials. So that is something also to plan for what type of concept you have. And then, of course, the soundscaping part, that is the thing that I'm working mostly with, to unleash the power of psychoacoustics and also create the perfect atmosphere for the concept that you are working on. And last but not least, to create the final master for this, to take all this in consideration and create the perfect type of mix for that type of sound environment. Here are just 3 different cases in 3 different target groups, I would say, like going from a pretty standard place to a much more fine dining area, I would say. The first one is just a food court, and here's just some measures that we did for that. We did some measures on the reverberation time. We have a dropped ceiling in both the eating in the kitchen area to make the sound environment much better with those kind of measures. We helped with the layout and placed the dishwasher, for example, on a much more strategic place that makes it less leakage into the dining area. And last but not least, we added a soundscape onto this. We enhanced the retro environment in this place, which is from the 60s, with sound design bathroom with custom-made productions, but also a music playlist from this area to enhance this environment. And also this fountain you see to the right here was something that we used, and together with the light designers, we created some different sceneries that go on and off on that fountain as well. So small things, small measures we did to enhance the sound environment here. Here is a little bit more ambitious project, or much more ambitious, I would say, the No 4 Boutique Hotel, something that actually the sound environment won the Red Dot Design Award, not the hotel, it's just the sound environment, the sound concept that won it. So we have, here is this is divided into a lot of different sound zones. The acousticians looked, of course, into different types of sound insulation. It's important when it's a hotel to have the right type of sound insulation between rooms and corridors, of course. And here we also did 14 different sound zones with 14 different themes coming from a lot of different areas around the world. I mean, everything was about to enhance the travel experience. So we have 14 themes, one Belle Epoque in Paris, for example. We have a Nordic gallery, we have a Scandinavian design, that is just 3 of them. And we have a total synergy between the visual components and the audio that runs through the whole hotel. We also have some sensors that is triggering sounds on certain occasions to make a surprise feel. And if you're interested in this, we have a lot of material on our site that you can look into. And last but not least, I will show you the fine dining experience called Wien, something in Skåne in the south of Sweden. A chef called Daniel Berlin, who his recent restaurant had 2 stars in the Guide Michelin, and I think he's aiming for 3 now. But this is something that is really, really on the high level with a very, very luxurious acoustic environment, I would say, with a drop-down ceiling and a lot of soft materials that would create the good acoustic environment. And also a top-of-the-line sound system from Genelec. So we have sprinkled this place with a lot of speakers, and that means that we can have a very low volume on the speakers because we have so many around this place. And also two curated playlists of hand-picked songs, detailed time programming. This is something, I mean, Donny Barin is really, really into details. So we have chosen, it's around 400 songs now that everyone is hand-picked and everyone is discussed together with him to create the perfect type of sound environment and musical atmosphere for his dining experience. Okay. The interesting thing about restaurants is also that restaurant has neighbors. I mean, often the restaurant maybe is in a bigger house. You have the local bar maybe in your block. And the interesting thing about this, I think it's a problem in a lot of different cities. I mean, at least in Sweden, we have a lot of problems like this. We have neighbors moving in over this bar and sometimes actually can complain on the sound from the bar and also have so much complaints that the bar needs to close. And this is actually a big problem in Sweden, that you have those type of rights that you can actually close down restaurants, even if you knew when you moved there that this would actually be a pretty noisy place. I mean, people will sit outside maybe and eat, and you have music from these bars and things like that. So here we have a lot of colleagues working on both sides here. Sometimes you have working for the restaurant to make a way for them to still exist. And sometimes you're working for the house and the neighbors and see how we can help them. But the problem here is that this is something that really needs to be talked about and also focused on because it has a big effect on the whole city environment. I mean, the restaurant is a part of a bigger city and there's a lot of people coming to a restaurant and using that type of restaurant. So it's not only up to the building to decide if this restaurant should exist or not. So this is a huge problem, and how we can create and coexist with lively venues in a bigger city where there's people actually living and sleeping. There's a lot of projects going on in Paris. They have different type of zoning, for example, to make certain areas more noisy and other areas less. But this is a big problem that really needs to be addressed, and this is something that we at Eftertanke work with as well. I mean, restaurants closing leads to cultural and social impact, problems with that, loss of foot traffic, shift in urban dynamics, so on and so forth, and it affects the whole city, actually. Okay, sorry for talking a little bit too much. I'll just leave you with, I think it's really, really important to attack the sound environment issue, both from an engineering and design perspective. And the takeaways I would like you to think about, as I said in the beginning, was good hearing around the table, little overhearing from other tables, and suitable sound design concept. And I will actually leave you with a business idea. I think it's actually an idea to open a bar with the perfect sound environment. I think that would actually have attraction and people will come there, and the bar could be called maybe this.
Sometimes you wanna go where everybody hears you. here's your name.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was inspiring, and yeah, I think that was a good call you made there. But let's maybe discuss that more after we've heard Lars Borg Andersen from the Michelin restaurant Alchemist, who is the director of music and sound design there. And he'll be giving a presentation about his work there, and then we'll talk again after his talk, Martin and Charles.
Yes, hello. I really want to go to Hears. That sounds great, Martin. I've added some audio to my presentation very last minute. I'm a bit unsure if I did it in stereo, but we will see. It'll just be short examples. I'll start out. Hello, my name is Lars Borg Andersen. You already heard that. And I work for Restaurant Alchemist. Essentially, what I do is I compose music and sound designs and soundscapes, ambiences for the entire experience. So what is Alchemist? Here are some pictures from the actual restaurant. And you're probably thinking, what the hell is going on? And when I got there, I thought the same thing. So Restaurant Alchemist is a 2-star Michelin restaurant located at Refshaleøen in Copenhagen. It's currently the 5th best restaurant in the world, as decided by the competition, so to say, World's 50 Best. It's a 5 to 7 hours immersive dining experience. So it's a very untraditional, in terms of length, restaurant experience. And essentially, Alchemist is at the very extreme end of restaurant experiences. It's not a traditional thing you go to. You don't go there to eat a la carte. You go there for a special menu, for a special wine pairing. And the guy you see on the right is Rasmus Munk. He's the founder of Alchemist and the guy in charge of the holistic vision for the whole restaurant. And you see I put holistic cuisine because Rasmus's vision for the restaurant is what he called holistic cuisine, which is essentially a philosophy of combining gastronomy with art, theater, science, and dramaturgy. So combining a lot of different art forms with the art of making food. While you're there, you're being served 50 impressions. An impression is a word that is being used for dishes or drinkable or drinks. So you will get 50 impressions, which can be either something that you will eat or something that you will drink. And all the dishes are usually very small bite-sized dishes. So you don't get an enormous steak. You will get a tiny slicing if you get it. And the food in itself is centered around a lot of political messages, such as plastic pollution, child labor, organ donation. But it can also be something that's more artistic, such as time or identity, or there's also like a theme around space and the junk that's revolving around the planet. I'll tell you a bit about that another time maybe. But moving on, so what is my job at Alchemist? Essentially, I create what I already said, music, soundscape, and sound design for dining areas, a multimedia dome, installation rooms, lounge areas, outdoor areas, bathrooms, an elevator, some social media content, and brand and pop-up events, because Alchemist hosts a lot of events. We recently hosted an event with the restaurant El Bulli and Enigma with Ferran and Albert Adria as like a combo event. But we've also hosted events for Netflix or Geberie and Krug Champagne. And as a final thing, I also produce music for the webpage and the telephone answering machine. And the full soundtrack is around 6 hours long. So it's a very long experience indeed. I'm just gonna briefly show you a bit of the music and a bit of like the different rooms that you go through, because at Alchemist, you don't sit in a single room, you go through multiple rooms. In total, you go through 7 rooms. I'm not gonna show you all of them, but I'm gonna show you some of them. And all of the rooms have sound. There's a specific intention for each room and the corresponding sound and soundscape. So just starting out, I'm just going to briefly play a bit of it so you can get the kind of feeling. This is outside the restaurant. You see this huge black gate made of bronze. And you hear this music.
I'm sorry, we can't hear it, Lars.
You cannot hear it?
No.
All right. It was very last minute that I added sound. Maybe Martin, you said something about the, let me just see, also share system audio.
Exactly, you need to click that, and also stereo quality there.
Tie
You find
screen.
it?
I'm actually, it just gives me the option of also sharing system. Sorry for being so uncool. Are you able to hear sound now?
No.
All right. Maybe I'll just move on because it being a 6-hour long soundtrack, there's a lot of different music that I could play you, and it will maybe take too much time. So I will just describe maybe what sound is. Well, outside the gate, you will hear this kind of entry music, like that sounds grand, that sounds mysterious, kind of giving you a feeling of, okay, you're about to enter this magical saga, this epic adventure, and it kind of primes you to feel that something epic is going to happen. The next room that you enter is actually an installation room, which is centered around the theme of identity, where you are presented with some music that sounds like this kind of heathen tribal ritual. And there is also a speak that is asking you questions such as, who are you? Who do you want to be in life? What defines you? Kind of centered again around identity, making people think, who are they in this experience? When you're done with that, you enter the lounge. This is the area where you get your first dishes and you get your first drinks, champagnes or cocktails. In here, the music is trying to reflect this kind of, that you're being added a lot of energy, something exciting is happening. You're at that place where you feel, okay, now I've started the adventure. I'm in the Shire of Lord of the Rings. You know, there's a vibrancy, there's some energy and a kind of an innocence to it. And the music and the soundscapes also try to reflect kind of the brassy and concrete elements of the actual physical surroundings, because you can see there's a lot of brass in the shininess of the image. When you're done with that room, you enter the big dome, the multimedia dome, and this is the main dining area. Here you sit for around 3 to 4 hours, and you can kind of see that there is a table bar, and that kind of image is actually a planetarium, so it revolves around you in 360 degrees. And in the dome, you're presented with a lot of different themes. This is an underwater theme, but the music, of course, has to sound underwatery. So I've chosen some underwater instruments such as synthesizers, bells, vibraphone, adding a lot of reverb, and of course, a soundscape of underwater, gurgly, bubbly, kind of sounds. Here's another theme, heartbeat, where it's supposed to look like you're inside a chest cavity, you could call it that. And you see a beating heart. Again, here is a soundscape where you hear the actual beating heart. You hear this kind of slimy, breathy noises emulating a feeling of being inside a body. And you also hear some music that is kind of adding a lot of voice, some low strings, trying to give you this kind of calm feeling, even though it's kind of macabre, the visuals. The third one is the mushroom universe, which is essentially a forest seen from a very small perspective, where you see these giant different funguses or mushrooms. And here you have a lot of soundscape of wood, nature, forest, wind. There's a lot of harp and some mystical synthesizers. I'm sorry the audio didn't work. That's my mistake. So I hope my description is enough for you to get an idea. So here you're thinking, what the hell is going on? This is actually our second installation room called Freedom Room, which essentially is a ball pit. Some music happens in there. There's a certain light show that happens in there. And this is kind of the comic relief of the evening, because you've already been at the restaurant for 4 to 5 hours. And you've had a lot of very serious impressions with a lot of serious artistic visions. But when you step inside this room, it's much more about just kind of letting go, letting loose on the different balls. There's a lot of adjectives describing personalities, kind of tying back together with the identity room from the beginning. So here you can let loose, you can pick up a ball, see an adjective that describes you, and feel like that you can let go and just be whatever you want to be, which the ball tells you. The final place that you go to is the balcony. There isn't a lot of good images, but all of these different rooms is in this same building. There's 2,000 meters of square, customer area separated on 3 floors. And this is on the 3rd floor. And there's actually a sort of balcony where you can kind of see the interior of the restaurant. You can actually see the backside of the dome. You can kind of see into the different rooms. So that gives you like a perspective of this whole experience that you went through. So moving on, what I'm going to tell you now, I've kind of described Alchemist, and I will tell you what I've learned throughout my experiences. So I've inserted a disclaimer because people like Martin and Charles are true professionals who have a lot more academic knowledge than I have. I have minor degrees of academic knowledge and come from a much more musically focused background. So what I'm going to tell you is my experiences on a practical level, stuff that I've learned for the 4 years that I've been working there, stuff that I've learned from hearing from my colleagues, from people who've went there to dine, what kind of feedback they've given us, and like creative and compositional practices that I've kind of learned while doing this interesting project. So just a disclaimer, it might not be exact science, and there's probably a lot of studies that can contradict what I'm saying, but feel free to take anything you want with it. Okay, so starting out, the role of music within an immersive dining experience, again, relating to Alchemist, because Alchemist is at the extreme end. So these roles is what I think works at Alchemist. So what this custom music or this custom soundtrack and this custom sound design and custom ambiences do is they add coherent uniqueness to a dining experience, meaning sort of in the same way that if you were watching a movie, if for instance you're watching Lord of the Rings, what the music does, it adds a unique flavor to the actual movie. The music sounds unique. It sounds like this is a unique music from this unique universe. And again, it gives a sort of authenticity to it. So at Alchemist, it creates a coherent uniqueness in the sense that Alchemist is a special place. You can only hear the music that you hear at Alchemist, in the same way that you can only get the certain type of dishes or see the certain type of architecture at Alchemist. And when I say coherent uniqueness, I mean that the uniqueness is presented throughout the experience. For instance, if you take the Harry Potter soundtrack, you will hear different themes and you hear different moods or thematic material, but it will still feel coherent in that it sounds like it comes from the same unique sound palette, if that makes sense. So other roles, it supports stories, ideal, values, or thematic elements. As I said earlier, there's a theme of identity. Maybe there's a theme, for example, at Alchemist, around technology, science, innovation, and those kind of elements can be represented in the music. Technology might be represented in electronic sounds, a soundscape that has a lot of beeps and boops and chicka chicka chicka. So you can kind of support those stories that the restaurant has through the sound by kind of emulating them or supporting them. The third role is that it enhances the immersive nature of one's immediate surroundings. So when you saw the dome theme that looked like an underwater environment, having underwater sounds or an underwater soundscape and underwater type of music, that will enhance the immersive nature because you feel like, okay, this is an actual environment that I'm staying in. Having I don't know, jazz music for the underwater scene would maybe break that immersion because you feel like, oh, I'm not actually underwater. I'm actually just inside a dome with some projections and some speakers. So another role is that it supports any dramaturgical structures through varied mood setting. And this means that, for instance, at Alchemist, there is a dramatic structure to the whole experience. There are certain elements of high dynamic drama and low dynamic drama. And I try with the music to kind of underscore all those types of movement. And you could do that with the music. And that, I would say, applies in the same way to cinema or theater, because the music follows the drama and supports the drama. So the fifth role is to strengthen brand recognition. And here I'm thinking mostly of how we present music through social media. So when we do social media, we use music that is Alchemist-y sounding. We use that kind of core sound palette from Alchemist and use them in the social media video. And that will, again, it will strengthen the brand recognition, because when you hear the same type of music or the same core sound palette through all your experiences with the brand, you will feel that, okay, this is the sound of the brand. And if you hear that sound, you will easily recognize the brand. It's the same with sound logos, I guess. I mean, when you hear the McDonald's melody, you will think of McDonald's, or when you hear the Intel sound logo, you will think of Intel. So that's very basic stuff, I would assume. And again, with the social media thing, the role is also to sell the experience before the actual arrival. If you hear the music before you arrive, then hopefully it will make you feel more intrigued before going there. It will maybe affect you a bit, maybe thinking more highly of the experience if you like the music and the social media visuals. You will maybe like the experience much more before actually arriving. So moving on. Okay, we will go into the more like pragmatical way. So these are creative strategies for functional background music, which I've kind of learned. People might be doing it other ways, and there's definitely other ways of doing it, depending on which types of restaurant it is. So these strategies is inherently tied to Alchemist, and Alchemist as a certain type of extreme dining experience. So these are my creative strategies. Take it with a grain of salt. Starting out, start by defining the core musical style, profile, or idiom, and build from there. And what I mean by that is that if you produce music or sound design for an experience that's quite large, as Alchemist, that's lasting several hours, I feel it's a good idea to start by figuring out what is the essential sound palette of this restaurant. And that could be, okay, does this restaurant sound jazzy? Does it sound classical? Does it sound electronic? You want to kind of hone in on what is the core sound, because of course you want to do variations. You don't want to do the same music for every instances of the experience, but it's, in my mind, a good idea to start out figuring what is the core of this and kind of build from that. And if you start by building a instrument palette, what instruments you would like to use, or you find the correct timbre, maybe in sound design, find the correct textures or types of sound effects, this will make it much easier building variants on that kind of core sound instead of having to reinvent it every time. The next thing is, don't fight for attention. You're not the star of the show. So what I've realized, and which is hard to swallow for any type of artist, sort of like Kill Your Darlings, is that people are not actively listening to the music, especially at Alchemist, because at Alchemist, you're being served 50 impressions or dishes. There's tons of stuff happening. You're being moved to new rooms all the time. You're not just having one waiter, you're maybe having 5 different waiters who's coming up to you, and you're experiencing tons of stuff. So the amount of attention that people will have for the music is very low. In my experience, they will perceive it kind of in the back, because it's also background music. So it's a good idea to realize that you can fight for attention. Don't try to do overly complex things to steal attention, or create themes that will make people clap their hands. Like it doesn't work the same way we do with a concert where people is focused on the music. So don't try to fight for the attention. Just accept that your role is in the background. It's a subtle influence of the kind of moods or emotions of the people. And in the same kind of extension of that, take your time with developing themes and creating arrangements. So this is much more like compositionally. You have plenty of time because people are not really listening that actively. So if you create a theme and you want to do the classical way of developing it by developing it fast and over different periods, and people will not notice that. And if you develop a theme too fast, coming from variant A to variant A4 of that melody, if you do it in a short amount of time, people will not perceive it. They are just gonna, oh, something happened. So don't be afraid to introduce a theme, repeat it tons of time, and then vary it and repeat that a tons of times. You have plenty of time because people can only partially focus on the music. Moving on, slow wins the race.
Thank you very much, Lars. Sorry to interrupt you here quickly. It's just time is running a bit. So
that's fair.
Well, I'm not asking you to finish, but please leave a bit of time for discussion. That'd be great.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Do you want me to really quickly do the
Yeah,
rest?
if you can go through it quickly, I think that would be great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I just... Okay, slow wins the race. Here we go. Slower tempos for immersive experiences is better, especially in a hectic environment, because you kind of want to offset to the chaotic environment, create a calmer, slower pace. Create even dynamics. People will notice if you have a breakdown, because it will seem like, oh, the music just went out. So my example is like lights. You want to keep a steady level of brightness. You don't want to flicker the brightness too much. This also ties in to keep the spectrum full. That means if you have bass and mids and highs, you want to keep that at all times. Ideally, if you remove the bass at some point, people will maybe perceive that as, oh, something, the dynamics went down. What kind of happened? Keep the volume in mind. If people are listening at low volumes, there are certain elements in the mix that they will miss, but you will maybe sit on your headphones and think, I can hear this clearly. They will not. So keep the volume in mind in terms of your mix. If it's at a very high volume, you can maybe think about that in your mix. Working with leitmotifs and other recurring melodic material can help bind the whole experience together. Again, like in a movie, that's compositional practice basics. So the final thing, limitations for scoring a dining experience. Again, this all relates to Alchemist. You must constantly be aware of not adding too much energy to the experience. Again, because that can kind of overstimulate people if a lot of stuff is already happening. Complexity is a dangerous tool that just, again, people are not listening actively. So if you produce a lot of complex music that's either complex rhythmically, timbre-wise, or melodically, harmonically, that can maybe people, they don't have the focus power to actually appreciate it or notice it. So it can be kind of have the opposite effect. You can never stray far into darker elements of music. That means essentially like major harmonies are great. Diminished chords, augmented chords, or minor chords is because people are supposed to feel good at such an experience. They want to have a good time. They don't want to feel depressed if you produce a minor cadence. Your techniques for arranging are very limited, meaning you can't really do big crescendos. You can't really do small diminuendos, very contrasting dynamics, breakdowns, solo instrumentations, because again, in my experience, these types of things will kind of try to get either too much attention or lose the attention. If the volume suddenly gets super loud, people will be like, what is going on? If it's super low, they'll also feel like, what is going on? So you kind of have to keep it simple in terms of arranging. And finally, the all-encompassing limitation is that music has to be pop or easy listening. Not pops in terms of the style, but it has to fit what most people will like, especially in terms of harmony, stuff like that. You want people to feel good. You want them to have a good time. It's musak. Don't try to do like avant-garde jazz, 12-tone music, or weird droney atonal stuff. Yeah, that was it. That was as fast as I could do the ending.
That's perfect, Lars. Thank you very much. If you can finish sharing your screen, and I'll
yes,
just give
I
you
can definitely finish share my screen.
Thank you for sharing so generally here. I have a question from Pascal for you, Lars. How do you manage indoor acoustic environment? Seems like rooms with a large volume and hard/smooth surfaces have a lot of reverb time and less speech intelligibility. How do you manage that?
So one thing is the actual volume. For instance, in our lounge, there's a lot of hard surfaces, concrete, metal, very reflective surfaces. So we keep the volume at a level where it doesn't clutter. And I've tried to, in the music, not add too much reverb because the room kind of gives its own sort of reverb. So those kind of elements I try to focus on. In general, the acoustics are okay throughout the entire restaurant. Within the dome, the acoustics is actually pretty good because the dome is on the backside covered with some kind of rock wool, porous, soft material, which absorbs a lot of the sound. And a lot of the different rooms are okay sealed in between them, so there's not that much audio bleed between the rooms. But in my experience, it's all about finding the right balance. If a room is too loud and it bleeds into the other room, you will maybe have to turn it a bit down or turn the music up in the other room to kind of offset it. It's a ongoing challenge because my boss Rasmus, he really likes music and he wants to have the music as loud as possible all the time, which can also work if you're sitting at like next to the speaker that's blurring out music. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yep, that makes perfect sense. Let me just move on quickly here. We got a few questions I'd love to get in here before we finish. There's a question here for you, Charles, and you actually already replied in the Q&A box there, but I'd love for you maybe to elaborate a bit on it. It's Cecilia who's asking, when it comes to seeming correlation between pitch, consonants, and flavor enhancement, do you think there's a connection with arousal level, i.e. high-pitched / dissonant sounds raising arousal level, and sour taste doing the same with slow consonant notes, lowering, calming you down?
Yep. So first bit of the reply in the box was to say yes for specifically for the spicy music. I think very much that the arousal of eating chili gives you is sort of captured in the arousing nature of the sonic composition that came out, sort of high energy, very dynamic piece. But when you get to other sonic seasonings for salty, for umami, for creamy, then I think it's not so easy to explain those in terms of necessarily arousal. But I think in terms more generally of sort of emotional consonance. And so for that, sometimes we're looking at whether we can use things like the semantic differential technique as a way of getting sort of 3 dimensions, effective dimensions of arousal, of dominance, valence, and so on. And with those 3 dimensions, we can figure out what each taste or flavor is in that sort of semantic differential space, and then try and find a sort of sonic composition that also fits in the same spot in that kind of space. And that, I think, is pretty part of the answer. But it might also be true that when you think about a sour taste, it comes on in your experience like that, and it kind of disappears. It's a very sharp temporal sensation of taste. And so maybe it's no surprise that then you match kind of sharp transitions in sound to sharp transitions in taste, whereas, you know, sweetness comes on a bit more gradually in your experience and then sort of lingers and fades away gently. And we sort of find similar sonic qualities seem to go well.
Right. Martin, you look like someone who wants to add something. If you don't, I have a question for you, but feel free to.
No, I think, I mean, I was just listening very carefully to what Charles was saying because it was interesting. So please add another question if you like.
Right. Okay. So I was noticing your remix, the restaurant sound remix. Yeah, your mixer there. That was really a very great visual of the sonic landscape. So what I'm thinking here is, how do you design the right balance between these sounds? Because, you know, when we make music, we're used to A/B listening. So if we think our music sounds like crap, we'll listen to something else and we compare it and see, oh, how can I improve this sound environment? What do you do in a restaurant?
That's a really good question. I mean, and it's also depending on where you are in the restaurant, of course. I mean, you have a different experiences on different places. I mean, the sweet spot of the mix that you're actually creating. I mean, this is just a tool and an idea of thinking about it in this way, and it's very effective to speak with clients and customers in this way. So we have used it both in indoor environments, but also actually in outdoor environments to talk about how to remix the city when it comes to noise sources and other things in the city that you want to get rid of. But I mean, back to your question, having a reference, I mean, of course you can add using placing out speakers and creating different type of sound environments with these speakers and adding sounds to the speakers, and then create a physical environment of different sound sources and try to have that as a reference. But I would say, I mean, just having this type of angle and create some kind of auralization that actually is coherent with the figures that you're measuring, that I mean, that will actually enhance the decision-making process of a thing like this, to start to listen to sounds and think about sounds in audible terms instead of just reading about it. So that is the biggest thing. But I mean, we need to take it much further, and it's a really interesting question, as you said. And as I mean, in the future, maybe we have a lot of type of reference cases, and also when we come further with the oralization thing with Unreal Engine and things like that, and also with the AR sets, we can maybe have the reference in some headphones, and then you can take off the headphones and you can listen to the actual sound environment, and then you can have that as a reference point. But yeah,
Okay.
my 2 cents on the subject.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Now, Charles, I have a question for
Yeah, I've
you.
got a little bit of an answer for that one as well. Just thinking
Yeah.
about how you sort of do the experiments, and how often a lot of the research one reads about, that's published about the impact of sound in various restaurants, was done at a different decade in a different country with a different demographic with a different kind of restaurant. So how do you know whether classic music would be the right one to increase the spend of your customers in your restaurant? And I was trying to say, well, you should really take the evidence that's out there as a proof of principle, but really need to do the experiments yourself to figure out what works in your space. Just know that sound matters, and then figure out what's how to optimize it. And so whether you should always be trying to do kind of experiments in your space where possible, playing one kind of music this week, one kind of music next week, and see how sales vary. But consumer behavior reports feedback is different. But do it in sort of a gradual way, so it's not like the diners don't know, if you're playing heavy metal and then jazz and then heavy metal, to see which one was better. That's going to be too much of a discrepancy. So maybe you kind of your increments, or what you experiment on, should be kind of suitably subtle variations that the diner doesn't get in a sort of dissonance, but nevertheless you can sort of collect some data and figure out how to optimize.
Cool. So I was wondering, with this knowledge that you're providing us with, Charles, how can we utilize that in our own home? Or if we want to invite a dinner party over, should we design the the soundscape for our dinner parties at home, or are we able to achieve some of these things that you're talking very much about designing in a more casual way?
Mm-hmm. I think you can. Whenever I serve Italian food, have a bit of Pavarotti going on in the background for that kind of semantic cheap hit. Make my wine taste more expensive to my guests by putting a bit of classical music. Oh, why wouldn't you? So there are simple things there. I guess in sort of one of the big challenges, I suppose, is some of these curated pairings of dishes with music work in the sort of fine dining places where you have the headphones, but that's not going to work in most places. So I'm really interested in some of the new technologies, sort of the hyper-directional loudspeakers, and which could give it sound showers distinct for each table. And there's some Italian company that's synchronizing that to the ordering system, so that mainstream restaurants could have music that would match the wine that you ordered for your table, but you couldn't hear next door's thing. And in the home, given how much it matters elsewhere, I certainly do think what I'm playing. I prefer, to be able to hear the conversation, of course. But I also know I've got the tracks that will get them out of the door at the end of the evening when I'm feeling a bit tired.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Okay, so just wrapping things up here, because time has escalated a bit, but it's super interesting to have you guys here. So if you were an acoustic expert, someone working as a sound professional, wanting to, go into the restaurant business, how would you approach the owner or restaurateur of a restaurant that needed some acoustic improvement and sound design improvement? Maybe you, Martin, have a lot of experience doing that.
Yes, and yeah, I think I may talked about it in my presentation. I think it's a very important thing is to have them to understand the subject. because that could be hard enough. And of course, I mean, we have to motivate the budget for the issue as well. But to really have the right type of conversation around it, and also to show different type of examples, and in the best of worlds also go around to different reference cases, so the person can actually feel different kind of sound environments and understand what they're aiming at. So yeah, that would be the way I would do it.
Okay, last one. Prove me wrong here. Integrating sound is too expensive and too time consuming.
I guess you could say. Well, one sees that kind of comment, not quite that common comment, from the wine experts, when there's all this sort of wine and music matching, and the sort of the snobs and the MWs, masters of wine out there. So why bother, wondering and worrying about the sound to make the wine taste different? Just buy a different wine, buy a better wine. But I think when you do have these sort of transformative experiences, the extraordinary ones that only emerge when you combine music and food or drink in some special way, then it's kind of the experience of those things that you cannot get from the food itself that makes it seem worthwhile, and you realize the value of the experience.
Okay. Do you have anything to add, Lars or Martin? Otherwise, yeah.
I would just say, I mean, stop being cheap. I mean, people who doesn't appreciate or don't think there's a potential, or maybe more focused on the bottom line, or maybe not focused on producing an aesthetic experience. Maybe McDonald's just wants to sell burgers, and they also already produce like cheap burgers on cheap materials. So, I mean, there is a large potential. If people don't feel that potential is needed at their type of restaurant, I mean, that's fine. But if you want to reach a different type of experience that has more aesthetics, or in my mind, aesthetics, then spend that extra buck. But it's easy for me to say, but that's my opinion, if that makes sense.
Right, but isn't the point also here that the buck you spent extra actually comes back twice or more?
Sure. I mean, in my experience at Alchemist, there's not a lot of profit if you want a lot of extra artistic elements, such as custom music. And I can get that. I produced a soundtrack for Sam and I, a new restaurant in Norway, Restaurant Iris. And I mean, they ordered a custom soundtrack, but it's expensive. I mean, and it isn't necessarily profitable in the beginning.
Right.
But yeah.
And it might be the case that in the future, AI is going to come along and replace some of the sound designers' creations.
No.
That's cheaper.
That's a new discussion for a new webinar, Charles.
Next time.
I'll invite you for that one as well. Okay, I think we'll wrap things up here, and I want to thank the three of you for joining us. Just once again, I'd like to just say thank you on behalf of the Danish Sound Cluster. And if you follow us on YouTube and LinkedIn, you will also see that we have a new webinar coming up here on the 6th of March, where we're talking about technology and human creativity. It should be super interesting, with a few great profiles. Richie Beretta's worked with Beyonce, Major Lazer. Alicia Said is a music producer and touring artist, also working for Lego. And there's Rasmus Kjærbo, who's the CEO of an audio hardware company called Componental. And we look forward to seeing you there. And for now, I would just like to say thank you very much for all of you attending. Sorry, there was a couple of questions I missed there. And sorry for Lars, your audio. I think we would like to maybe send that out on a follow-up email, perhaps with audio. We'll work on that. And yeah, thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thank you.